Curiosity had a way of surviving even in the coldest hearts. Calder Holt thought he'd buried his long ago, somewhere under the snowdrifts that swept through his wide, silent ranch each winter. Yet when the sheriff's wagon rolled up that afternoon and a slender figure stepped down, clutching a worn shawl, something unfamiliar stirred beneath his calm. The woman's eyes were tired but bright, like embers refusing to die. Sheriff Danton cleared his throat. "Just a temporary arrangement, Calder. She needs work. You need help." Calder's jaw tightened. "You're here to wash dishes, not steal my peace," he told her flatly. Evelyn May lowered her gaze. The words stung, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that pride was a luxury for those who had a place to belong. The air inside Holt Ranch was heavy with order, every boot lined, every surface polished to an impossible shine. It was a home that looked lived in only by ghosts. Calder gave her a small room near the kitchen and went back to his ledger, his pen scratching like a wasp against the silence. In the following days, Evelyn moved through his world with quiet precision. She washed, swept, mended, and learned which floorboards groaned beneath her feet so she could step lighter. When she hummed, it was faint, almost unintentional, a whisper of habit from the days she'd taught schoolchildren in Abilene. Calder would pause mid-step when he heard it, frowning as if sound itself offended him. Yet he never told her to stop. He'd lost his brother in a storm 2 winters ago, and since then, even beauty felt like betrayal, as if joy mocked the dead. Each morning, Evelyn rose before dawn to light the hearth. She watched him ride out into the frozen range, a tall shadow against the pale horizon. By the time he returned, her hands were red from scrubbing, her eyes smarting from smoke. She never complained. When he entered, she'd lower her gaze respectfully, though sometimes she caught him glancing toward her hands, not in suspicion, but in some quiet confusion, as if wondering what strength kept them steady. The townsfolk whispered that no woman lasted long under Holt's roof. "He don't need a wife," Martha Clay said at the Mercantile. "He needs a ghost who can cook." Evelyn heard them once and smiled sadly. She was halfway to being a ghost already. But ghosts have hearts too, and hers began to ache in that great, lonely house. She saw pieces of herself in Calder, both punished by something they couldn't quite name. His silence wasn't arrogance. It was armor. Her obedience wasn't weakness. It was survival. They circled one another carefully, as if any sudden kindness might shatter the fragile order they both depended on. One evening, the wind rose early, shaking the shutters. Calder sat by the fire, a book unopened in his hand. Evelyn entered to place a cup of tea beside him. He didn't thank her, but after she left, he noticed she'd left her old shawl hanging on the chair, the edges frayed, smelling faintly of lavender. He touched it once before setting it aside, uneasy with the unfamiliar warmth creeping through him. Outside, the snow thickened into a wall of white. Evelyn stood near the barn, having heard a soft whimper from somewhere in the drift. She followed it, half blind in the swirling flakes, until she found a small stray pup trembling against the fence post. Without thinking, she knelt, cradling it close beneath her shawl. The cold bit deep into her skin, but the sound of that helpless cry pressed harder against her heart. Inside, Calder heard something, a faint call swallowed by the storm. He stepped to the window, saw a blur of motion near the gate, and felt panic bloom sharp and immediate. The ledger fell from his hand. He rushed out, snow cutting his face like glass. There she was, half collapsed, arms wrapped around the tiny creature she'd tried to save. "Fool woman," he muttered, voice trembling as he lifted her. "You'll freeze to death out here." Her lashes fluttered, a faint breath escaping her lips. "It was crying," she whispered, her voice fading into the wind. For a long moment, he stood motionless, the weight of her small frame against his chest stirring something deeper than fear, a memory of how it felt to care, and how dangerous that could be. By the time he carried her inside, the fire had nearly died. He laid her near it, stripped off his coat, and threw another log into the hearth. As warmth spread through the room, Calder knelt beside her, brushing a strand of damp hair from her cheek. His pulse hammered. He'd told himself peace came from control, from silence, from distance. Yet in that fragile moment, watching her breathe again, he understood how wrong he'd been. Outside, the storm raged on, swallowing every sound except the crackle of the fire and the slow, steady rhythm of her breathing. Calder sat back, unable to look away. For the first time in years, the house did not feel haunted. It felt alive. And though he didn't yet understand why, he knew nothing in him would be the same when the morning came. Evelyn woke to the faint crackle of fire and the heavy stillness of a world just after storm. Her body ached, her skin warm under layers of blankets, and for a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then the scent of pine smoke and saddle leather reached her, and she saw Calder sitting near the hearth, one arm resting on his knee, eyes half closed but alert. The sight startled her more than the memory of Snow, this hard man watching over her as if her breath itself mattered. When she stirred, he rose instantly, voice rough but low. "You should have stayed inside," he said. "I told you this land doesn't forgive foolishness." She managed a faint smile. "Then maybe I was made for it." He wanted to be angry, but her words disarmed him. The stubborn spark in her eyes reminded him of something long lost, hope or faith, or maybe the part of himself that hadn't turned to stone. 4 days afterward, she stayed near the fire while he worked, her recovery slow but steady. He'd leave food on the table, each meal arranged with silent care. When she thanked him, he would grunt something about keeping the help alive. Yet she saw through the armor now. His indifference had seams. As she grew stronger, she returned to her chores. The house no longer felt so cavernous. Sometimes Calder would find her humming softly as she kneaded bread, and instead of stopping her, he would listen from the doorway. The sound filled the spaces grief had hollowed out. One evening, she caught him watching her reflection in the window, his gaze uncertain, like a man learning the shape of kindness again. She didn't speak, afraid to break whatever fragile thread was forming between them. Winter pressed on, relentless. Outside, the world lay white and still, but inside, something began to thaw. Calder started showing her small things, the way to read the sky for snow, how to saddle a horse properly. She surprised him by learning quickly, her confidence quiet but sure. When she laughed, he felt something loosen in his chest. One night, as they stood side by side near the window, she whispered, "When I first came here, I thought the silence would swallow me." He answered softly, "It nearly swallowed me too." Their eyes met then, and for the first time, neither looked away. Still, Calder feared his own heart. He knew loss too well. Love, to him, was a storm that took everything it touched. But Evelyn's presence had rewritten the house, softened its edges. He found himself repairing the old piano in the corner, though he hadn't played since his brother's death. When she discovered it, she asked him to show her a tune. His hands trembled on the keys, but the sound that rose was warm and alive. Evelyn listened, smiling through tears she didn't try to hide. Then came another storm, fiercer, darker than before. The sky cracked open with wind and snow, howling through the valley. Calder rode out to secure the barn doors, muttering that he'd return in minutes. But when the minutes stretched too long, Evelyn's heart began to pound. The wind screamed, and through it came a deep, splintering crash. Without thinking, she pulled on his coat and ran into the blinding snow. Each step burned, but she followed the faint glint of lantern light until she saw him, trapped beneath a fallen beam, snow piling fast around him. "Calder!" she cried, falling to her knees beside him. His breath came ragged, his face pale. "Leave me," he rasped. "It's too heavy." She shook her head, tears freezing against her cheeks. "I won't." With trembling arms, she pried and pushed until the beam shifted, every muscle straining, the storm's roar drowning her sobs. When he was free, she helped him to his feet, her body shaking from cold and exhaustion. He clutched her hand tight, his voice breaking. "You should have stayed safe." She met his gaze fiercely. "Not when you were out here alone." They staggered back to the house, collapsing by the fire, breathless and soaked. Calder stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "I told myself peace meant silence," he whispered. "But peace was you all along." She reached for his hand, her touch light, reverent. The firelight flickered across their faces, two souls thawing together in the heart of winter. When morning came, the world outside shimmered under sunlight, every branch sheathed in crystal. Calder stepped out onto the porch, the air sharp and pure. Evelyn joined him, her shawl fluttering against his sleeve. The land, once cruel and barren, seemed softer now. He looked at her and said quietly, "Stay." No command, no pride, just a plea wrapped in humility. She smiled, eyes bright as the thawing snow. "I already have." Inside, the fire burned steady. The house no longer echoed with loss but with quiet life. The clink of dishes, the murmur of laughter, the small, miraculous sound of two people learning how to begin again. And though winter would return, Calder knew it would never be as cold as it once was. The storm had come, and for the first time, it had left something behind, the fragile, beautiful promise of peace that neither of them would ever face alone.